I never imagined that the person who would try to destroy my life would be the same girl who shared my childhood, my secrets, and my blood. If someone had told me years ago that my own sister would try to kill me just to marry my husband, I would have laughed. Back then, I believed family meant safety. I believed love was unbreakable. I believed loyalty was permanent. I was wrong. From the outside, my life looked perfect. I had a loving husband, a peaceful home, and a family everyone admired. Friends often told me how lucky I was. They envied my marriage, my stability, and especially the close bond I shared with my younger sister, Lena. Lena was always around. She visited often, sometimes without calling first. She laughed at my jokes, hugged me tightly, and told everyone how much she loved me. People said we didn't act like sisters. We acted like best friends. I trusted her with everything. That trust nearly killed me. I met my husband, Ethan, 6 years ago. He was gentle, ambitious, and calm in a way that made me feel safe. When we got married, Lena cried harder than anyone else. She held my hands and told me I deserved happiness. She said she was proud of me. I believed every word. After the wedding, Lena started coming over more frequently. At first, it felt normal. She said she missed me. She said she felt lonely in her own apartment. I welcomed her every time. She was my sister, my blood. Slowly, things began to shift. She started asking questions about my marriage, not simple ones, detailed ones. She wanted to know how Ethan treated me, what time he came home, what made him angry, what made him smile. I thought she was just being protective. Then she began complimenting him constantly. "He's different from other men," she would say. "You're so lucky he chose you. Men like him don't stay with just anyone." I smiled, but something inside me felt uneasy. Lena started staying late at our house. Sometimes she slept over. She sat closer to Ethan on the couch. She laughed louder at his jokes than I did. She remembered little things about him, his favorite food, his favorite movies, things I sometimes forgot. Still, I ignored it, because no one wants to believe something dark about their own sister. Around that time, my marriage started to feel different. Ethan became quieter, more distant. He spent more time on his phone. When I asked him what was wrong, he blamed work stress. Lena always defended him. "You're overthinking," she said. "Men need space. If you keep questioning him, you'll push him away." How words got into my head. I started doubting myself. I wondered if I was being emotional, sensitive. Lena seemed calm, reasonable, supportive. I trusted her advice more than my own instincts. That was my mistake. One night, after a small argument with Ethan, I broke down. I told Lena I was scared of losing my marriage. I told her I felt something was wrong but couldn't explain it. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. I'll protect you." I didn't know she was already planning my end. A few weeks later, my body began to betray me. I felt dizzy for no reason. My head throbbed constantly. Sometimes my vision blurred and I struggled to stand. Doctors ran tests but found nothing serious. They said it was probably stress. Lena stepped in immediately. She cooked for me. She brought me drinks. She reminded me to take my medicine. She was always there. One night, she made me a cup of tea and insisted I drink it before bed. Minutes later, my stomach twisted. My hands trembled. I collapsed on the bathroom floor, barely able to breathe. Ethan rushed me to the hospital. Lena cried, shaking, blaming herself for not watching me closely enough. Doctors called it unexplained. I believed them. I never once suspected her. Because how could someone who loved me want me dead? But the truth was already forming behind my back, quiet, calculated, and dangerous. And the most painful part? My husband was closer to her than I realized. Something inside me began to feel wrong, even though I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just my body anymore. It was the atmosphere in my own home. Conversations felt heavier. Silence felt louder. And the space between my husband and me kept growing, while the space between him and my sister seemed to disappear. After the hospital incident, Ethan became overly attentive, but only for a short time. He checked on me, asked how I felt, and stayed home more often. But his concern felt forced, like he was playing a role instead of feeling it. Meanwhile, Lena never left my side. She slept on the couch, cooked every meal, and watched me constantly, as if she was afraid I would disappear the moment she looked away. Everyone praised her. "You're so lucky to have a sister like that," people said. "She really loves you," others added. I smiled and agreed, while something cold settled in my chest. As my strength slowly returned, I began noticing things I had ignored before. Lena started dressing differently when she came over. Softer colors, perfume she never used to wear, clothes that felt inappropriate for someone visiting her married sister's home. She laughed more, touched Ethan's arm casually, and made jokes only he seemed to understand. Ethan didn't stop her. That hurt more than I expected. One evening, I walked into the living room unexpectedly and found them sitting close together whispering. They jumped apart when they saw me. Ethan looked guilty. Lena smiled calmly, like nothing had happened. "You scared us," she said lightly. I apologized, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every moment from the past few months, her questions, her advice, her constant presence, my sudden illness. A quiet thought tried to surface, but I pushed it down. I didn't want to be paranoid. I didn't want to accuse my own sister of something unthinkable. A few days later, I overheard an argument. I was in the bedroom when I heard Ethan's voice coming from the kitchen. It was low and tense. Lena's voice followed, sharp but controlled. I moved closer to the door, my heart pounding. "This wasn't the plan," Ethan said. "Lower your voice," Lena replied. "Do you want her to hear?" My stomach tightened. "I'm saying it's getting dangerous," he continued. "She ended up in the hospital." "That wasn't supposed to happen yet," Lena snapped. "You're losing your nerve." I stepped back, my hands shaking. They were talking about me. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about something else. Maybe stress was playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew the truth was closer than I wanted to admit. The next morning, Lena acted normal, too normal. She smiled, made breakfast, and asked how I slept. Ethan avoided my eyes. That was when fear truly entered my heart. I started paying attention. I stopped eating food Lena prepared when I could avoid it. I poured my own drinks. I pretended to take my medicine, but secretly threw it away. Slowly, my dizziness lessened. The headaches faded. That was no coincidence. One afternoon, while Lena was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I didn't plan to look. I truly didn't, but the screen lit up with a message preview, and my name was right there. "She's getting stronger. We need to move faster." My breath caught in my throat. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling. The messages were still open. There were dozens of them. Between Lena and Ethan, weeks, months. Plans, excuses, complaints about me. "She doesn't appreciate you. She's in the way. Once it's done, we can be together openly." I felt like the room was spinning. Then I saw the message that destroyed whatever hope I had left. "If she doesn't make it, we can say it was her health. No one will question it." I dropped the phone and stumbled back, barely able to stand. My sister didn't just want my husband. She wanted my life. In that moment, everything became clear. The illness, the distance, the lies, the fake concern.
I wasn't sick. I was being slowly poisoned, carefully, patiently, by the two people I trusted most. I locked myself in the bedroom and cried silently, covering my mouth so no one would hear me. Fear wrapped around me like a cage. I realized I wasn't safe in my own home. I needed to survive. That night at dinner, I acted normal. I laughed, I thanked Lena for the food, I smiled at Ethan. Inside, I was counting every breath. I knew if they suspected that I knew, I wouldn't get another chance. As I lay in bed later, staring into the darkness, one thought kept repeating in my mind. They think I'm weak. They think I'm unaware. They think I won't fight back. They were wrong. Because the moment I discovered the truth, I stopped being their victim and started becoming their worst mistake.
I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house felt louder than it should have been. Every footstep made my heart race. I lay still, breathing slowly, pretending to be calm while my mind planned every possible way to survive. I knew one thing for certain. I could not confront them. Not yet. If I showed fear or anger, it would only push them to act faster. I had already seen how patient they could be. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to make noise. When I passed the kitchen, I noticed the trash had been taken out. My chest tightened. Lena was careful, too careful. She erased evidence without thinking twice. At breakfast, I forced myself to eat just enough to look normal. Lena watched me closely, her eyes following every movement of my fork. When I reached for water, she quickly stood up. "I'll get that for you," she said. "No," I replied too quickly, then softened my voice. "I'm fine. I want to get it myself." For a split second, something dark crossed her face. Then it was gone. Ethan barely spoke. He kept his eyes on his plate. I wondered if guilt ever touched him, or if he had already convinced himself that I was an obstacle instead of a wife. That day, I pretended everything was fine. I cleaned the house, I answered messages, I even laughed at one of Lena's jokes. Inside, I was watching, listening, waiting. In the afternoon, Ethan said he had to run an errand. Lena volunteered to stay with me. The moment the door closed behind him, the air felt heavier. "You look better today," she said, studying my face. "I'm so relieved." I nodded. "I feel stronger." Her lips tightened slightly. "That's good, but you still need rest." There it was, control disguised as care. "I was thinking," she continued, "maybe we should increase your supplements. The doctor said stress can be dangerous." My heart pounded. "Which doctor?" She hesitated. "The one we saw before." I smiled weakly. "I don't remember that." She stared at me for a moment, as if deciding something. Then she smiled back. "You've been through a lot. Memory issues are normal." I realized then how easily she could rewrite reality. That evening, when Ethan returned, I excused myself early and locked the bedroom door. I took my phone and quietly started documenting everything. Screenshots, dates, times. I sent copies to an email account I created secretly. If something happened to me, I wanted proof to exist somewhere beyond this house. A few days later, Lena suggested a short trip. "Fresh air will help you recover," she said. "There's a quiet cabin outside the city. Just us, no stress." Just us. Fear crept up my spine. Ethan supported the idea immediately. "It's perfect," he said. "You'll heal faster." I realized then that this was the next step in their plan. Isolation, distance from anyone who could help me. I agreed. Saying no would have raised suspicion. We left 2 days later. The cabin was beautiful, surrounded by trees and silence. Too much silence. There was barely any cell signal. The moment I realized that, my stomach dropped. That first night, Lena cooked dinner while Ethan unpacked. The smell made me nauseous. I pretended to eat, pushing food around my plate while she watched. "You're not eating much," she said softly. "I'm not very hungry," I replied. She leaned closer. "You need your strength." That night, I pretended to fall asleep early.
Through half-closed eyes, I saw her enter the room quietly. She stood beside my bed for a long moment, watching me. I held my breath, forcing my body to stay still. She finally left. The next morning, I overheard them talking outside. "This is taking too long," Ethan said. "She's cautious now," Lena replied, "but she can't avoid it forever." My hands trembled. I knew then that if I stayed, I wouldn't leave that place alive. I needed help, but I couldn't call anyone. No signal, no neighbors, just trees and silence. Later that day, Lena suggested a walk near the edge of the woods. "Movement is good for you," she said, smiling. Every instinct screamed at me to run. As we walked, she stayed slightly behind me. I could feel her eyes on my back. My heart was beating so hard I thought she could hear it. We reached a narrow path near a steep slope. The ground below was rocky. A fall from here wouldn't look suspicious. She stopped walking. "You know," she said calmly, "life isn't fair. Some people get everything and others get nothing." I turned slowly. She was smiling, but there was no warmth in it. Before I could speak, she stepped closer. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about love. It was about erasing me.
She stood there, blocking the narrow path, the wind moving her hair gently as if nothing was wrong. For a moment, time felt frozen. The forest was silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I forced myself to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. "What do you mean?" I asked softly, pretending not to understand. She looked past me, down toward the rocky slope, then back at my face. "I mean, some people are born to be loved," she said, "and some people are just in the way." I swallowed hard. My legs felt weak, but I planted my feet firmly on the ground. "You've always had everything," she continued. "The attention, the praise, the perfect life. Even him." Her voice dropped. "You didn't even have to try." I finally understood something I had been blind to my entire life. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't about my husband alone. This jealousy had been growing for years, quietly feeding on every comparison, every moment she felt second to me. "I loved him," she said, "before you even noticed him, but he chose you." I shook my head slowly. "You're wrong," I said. "This doesn't end the way you think it will." She smiled again, that empty smile. "It ends today." She took a step closer. I took a step back, pretending to lose my balance slightly. Fear flashed across her face, not concern, but excitement. She thought she had won. That was when I screamed. I screamed as loudly as I could, tearing the silence apart. I stumbled backward on purpose, slipping on the loose dirt, grabbing onto a tree root just in time. Rocks tumbled down the slope. She froze. From a distance, I heard Ethan's voice calling out, "What's happening?" Lena stepped back instantly, her expression changing faster than I thought possible. When Ethan came running toward us, she grabbed my arm tightly. "She almost fell," she cried. "I was trying to save her." I collapsed to the ground, shaking, clutching my chest. I let the fear show this time. I let myself cry. I felt dizzy. I don't know what happened. Ethan knelt beside me, panic on his face. For the first time in weeks, he looked genuinely afraid of consequences. That night, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. While they slept, I quietly packed a small bag. My hands shook as I zipped it closed. I took my phone, my charger, and the screenshots I had saved. I waited until the house was completely silent. Then I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just followed the road, barefoot, heart racing, lungs burning. After nearly an hour, I finally saw headlights in the distance. A truck slowed down when it saw me waving desperately. The driver was an older woman. She didn't ask many questions. One look at my face was enough. She drove me to the nearest police station. Sitting there under the harsh lights, wrapped in a blanket, I told them everything. The messages, the poisoning, the cabin, the conversation by the slope. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. For the first time, I felt safe. The investigation moved quickly. The messages on Lena's phone matched the ones I had saved. The doctor confirmed traces of poison in my system from earlier tests that had been dismissed as stress. Everything connected. When the police went to the cabin, Ethan and Lena were gone. They had run. But they didn't get far. They were arrested 2 days later at a motel across the state line. Ethan confessed first. He said he felt trapped. He said Lena promised him a fresh start. He said he didn't think it would go this far. Lena said nothing. She stared at me in the courtroom with the same cold eyes, as if I was the one who had betrayed her. When the judge read the charges, my hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of everything I had survived. Months passed. I moved to a new place, I changed my number, I started therapy. Healing wasn't fast and it wasn't easy. Some nights I still woke up shaking, hearing her voice in my head. But I was alive, and slowly I started to feel like myself again. I learned something painful but important through all of this. Evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it shares your blood. Sometimes it sleeps under the same roof and smiles at you every day. If I didn't listen to that quiet voice inside me, if I didn't pay attention to the small signs, I wouldn't be here telling this story. I share this not for sympathy, but as a warning. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. If someone tries to isolate you, question it. If love starts to feel like control, it isn't love. And if this story made you pause, made you think, or reminded you of someone who might be in danger, don't scroll away. Share this, speak up, and never underestimate your instinct to survive. Even after everything was exposed, even after the arrests and the evidence and the court dates, my mind refused to accept what my life had become. Some mornings I woke up expecting to hear my sister moving around the house or my husband calling my name from the other room, and then reality would crash down on me all over again. People think the danger ends once the truth comes out. It doesn't. That's when the silence begins. During the investigation, detectives asked me the same questions again and again. They wanted details, exact words, exact dates, exact moments. I answered every time, even when my throat tightened and my hands shook. I wanted everything documented. I wanted nothing left unclear. They told me Lena had been planning it for months, slowly, carefully. She researched substances that could cause weakness without immediate death. She studied my routines. She used my trust as her weapon. Hearing that broke something inside me, because it meant this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was a choice she made over and over again. Ethan tried to contact me from jail. He sent letters apologizing, explaining, blaming stress, blaming manipulation, blaming love. I never replied. Some apologies don't deserve forgiveness. Some explanations don't change the damage. When the trial finally began, I sat in the courtroom with my hands folded tightly in my lap. My heart pounded as Lena was brought in. She didn't look at me at first. When she finally did, her expression wasn't regret. It was anger, as if I had ruined her life by surviving. Witnesses spoke, experts testified, my medical records were displayed, the messages were read out loud. Hearing my own sister's words spoken in that cold room made my stomach twist. She's in the way. She won't last much longer. Once she's gone, everything will be ours. I watched the faces in the room change as people realized how close I had come to dying. Lena's defense tried to paint her as misunderstood, emotionally unstable, influenced, but the evidence was too clear. Planning leaves patterns, and she left many. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel relief the way I expected. I felt tired. Deeply tired, like my soul had been carrying a weight for too long. Justice doesn't erase trauma, it only closes one door.
After the trial, I disappeared from the life I used to know. I moved cities. I cut contact with people who asked too many questions. I needed space to breathe without being defined by what almost happened to me. Healing came slowly. There were days I felt strong, almost normal, and then there were nights when fear crept back in, whispering that danger could come from anywhere. I learned that survival isn't a single moment, it's a process. Therapy taught me something important. I wasn't weak for trusting. I wasn't stupid for loving. What happened wasn't my fault. And yet, the guilt lingered. Guilt for not seeing it sooner. Guilt for surviving when someone I loved chose darkness. Guilt for the family that was forever broken. One afternoon, months later, I sat alone in my new apartment, sunlight coming through the window. I realized something had changed. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. The silence felt peaceful instead of threatening. That's when I knew I was finally moving forward. I decided to tell my story not because it was easy, but because silence protects the wrong people. There are others out there living with subtle manipulation, with emotional control disguised as care, with danger hiding behind familiar smiles. I was almost erased by someone who knew me my entire life. That's the part people struggle to understand. We're taught to fear strangers, but the most dangerous betrayals often come from those closest to us, from people who know our habits, our weaknesses, our kindness. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, don't ignore it. Pay attention to patterns, not promises. Watch how people react when you set boundaries. Notice who benefits from your weakness. And if you're already questioning your safety, please understand this. You are not imagining things. Your intuition exists for a reason. I survived because I listened to that quiet voice before it was too late. Not everyone gets that chance. If this story reached you, if it made you pause even for a moment, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who might need it. Talk about it. Bring these conversations into the light, because survival stories aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to save lives.
For a long time after everything ended, I believed survival meant simply staying alive. I thought once the danger was gone, once the people who tried to erase me were locked away, I would be free. But survival has layers, and the deepest one begins after the threat is removed. In the weeks following the trial, my body was safe, but my mind wasn't. I flinched when someone walked too close behind me. I checked locks multiple times before sleeping. I avoided mirrors because sometimes I didn't recognize the person staring back. She looked older, quieter, as if a part of her had been stolen. People around me tried to be supportive in their own way. Some said I was strong, others said I was lucky. A few even said I should be grateful it didn't end worse. None of them understood how those words felt like pressure, like I wasn't allowed to be broken because I survived. What haunted me most wasn't the poisoning or the planned fall. It was the memories that came before. Childhood moments, shared laughter, secrets whispered late at night. Every good memory felt contaminated, as if it had been leading to this outcome all along. I kept asking myself the same questions. When did she start hating me? Was it always there? Did she ever truly love me? Therapy forced me to confront a painful truth. I didn't need answers to those questions to heal. Some people never explain their cruelty in a way that makes sense. Waiting for understanding can trap you in the past. One day, my therapist asked me something that changed everything. If she had succeeded, she said gently, what would you want people to remember about you? I couldn't answer at first. For so long, my identity had been reduced to almost being a victim, almost dying, almost losing everything. I realized I didn't want my life defined by what someone else tried to do to me. I wanted my story back. So I started rebuilding in small ways. I redecorated my apartment, choosing colors I loved instead of ones that felt safe. I went for walks without headphones, learning to exist in the world again. I wrote in a journal every night, not about fear, but about things that made me feel present: the taste of coffee, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of rain. Slowly, I began to trust myself again. But trust in others came harder. I noticed how easily people crossed boundaries without realizing it, how often concern turned into control, how many times I had ignored discomfort in the past to keep the peace. I promised myself I would never do that again. That promise was tested sooner than I expected. A distant relative reached out, asking questions about the case. At first, they sounded caring. Then their curiosity became invasive. They wanted details, emotions, reactions. They wanted to know how it felt to almost die. I stopped replying. For the first time in my life, I chose silence for my own protection, not out of fear. That was power. Months later, I received a message from someone I didn't recognize. They said they had heard my story through a mutual connection. They said they were living with a sister who controlled everything they did. Their words shook me. The fear, the confusion, the self-doubt, it was all there. I realized then that what happened to me wasn't rare. It was just rarely spoken about. Manipulation doesn't start with violence. It starts with doubt, with someone slowly convincing you that your feelings are wrong, your instincts are unreliable, and your voice is unnecessary. By the time danger appears, you're already trained to ignore it. I replied to that message carefully. I didn't give advice. I didn't tell them what to do. I simply said this: if something feels wrong, you don't need proof to protect yourself. That sentence felt heavier than anything I had said in court. As time passed, the nightmares became less frequent. The fear softened. But there were moments, random, unexpected moments, when grief returned. Not for my marriage, not for my sister as she was at the end, but for the version of my life that never had a chance to exist. I allowed myself to mourn that. Healing isn't pretending nothing happened. It's accepting that something did and choosing not to let it own you forever. One evening, while organizing old boxes, I found a photo of Lena and me as children. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, unaware of the future. My hands trembled as I held it. For a second, anger surged through me. Then I put the photo down and let go. Not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. I finally understood that survival wasn't about being strong all the time. It was about allowing myself to be human, to feel fear without shame, to feel anger without guilt, to feel hope without apology. I wasn't just someone who escaped a plan meant to destroy her. I was someone who chose to live fully after it. And that choice, made every single day, was the real victory. Life didn't suddenly become peaceful after that realization. Healing isn't a straight line. Some days I felt strong and grounded, and other days a single memory could pull me back into the fear so fast it stole my breath. I learned to stop judging those days. They weren't failures. They were reminders of how deeply everything had cut. I started noticing how much my body remembered, even when my mind wanted to move on. Loud arguments in public made my chest tighten. Someone standing too close behind me in a line made my hands sweat. When people asked personal questions too quickly, my instincts screamed at me to retreat. Before, I would have ignored those signals to be polite. I don't do that anymore. For the first time in my life, I began setting boundaries without explaining them. I didn't owe anyone my comfort. I didn't owe anyone access to my story. That was new for me, and at first it felt selfish. Then it felt necessary. Eventually, it felt normal. One of the hardest things to face was how deeply I had been conditioned to doubt myself. Looking back, the warning signs had been there long before the poisoning, the subtle competition, the quiet comparisons, the way Lena minimized my feelings while presenting herself as the reasonable one, the way Ethan slowly stopped listening to me and started relying on her voice instead. It wasn't one big betrayal, it was 1,000 small ones. That realization was painful, but it was also freeing. It meant I wasn't blind, I was trained not to see. Once I understood that, I began to trust my perception again. If something felt wrong, I didn't argue with myself anymore. I listened. At some point, people started asking if I would ever trust again, if I would ever love again. The question used to scare me. Love had nearly cost me my life, but avoiding connection felt like letting them take something else from me. So I approached trust differently. I moved slowly. I watched how people reacted when I said no. I paid attention to consistency instead of charm. I noticed whether actions matched words. I stopped romanticizing potential and focused on behavior. That alone changed everything. I met new people who knew nothing about my past. With them, I wasn't the woman who survived. I was just myself. That anonymity felt like oxygen. It reminded me that my identity was bigger than my trauma. Still, there were moments when the past reached out unexpectedly. One afternoon, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyer. It was from Lena. I didn't open it right away. Just holding the envelope made my hands shake. Her name on the paper felt heavier than it should have. I sat with it for a long time, debating whether I even wanted to know what she had to say. Part of me hoped for remorse. Another part feared manipulation. When I finally opened it, the words were cold. She didn't apologize. She didn't take responsibility. She wrote about how unfair everything was, how her life had been ruined, how I had taken something from her by surviving. Reading it made one thing clear. Some people don't regret what they did. They regret that it didn't work. That letter was the closure I didn't know I needed, not because it gave me peace, but because it ended hope. Hope that she would change. Hope that there was a misunderstanding. Hope that love could have saved her. I burned the letter, not in anger, in release. After that, I stopped waiting for acknowledgement from people who had already shown me who they were. I stopped looking backward for validation. My future didn't need their permission. As time went on, I found myself speaking about my experience more openly, but carefully. Not everyone deserves your truth, but some people need to hear it. I spoke to a small support group once, sitting in a circle with strangers who carried different scars, but the same understanding. When I finished talking, the room was silent. Then one woman whispered, "I thought it was just me." That moment stayed with me. Evil thrives in isolation. Healing grows in shared understanding. I began to realize that my story wasn't just about survival. It was about awareness, about recognizing emotional manipulation before it turns dangerous, about understanding that love doesn't demand silence, obedience, or sacrifice of self. I used to believe strength meant enduring quietly. Now I know strength means speaking, even when your voice shakes. There are still days when grief shows up unexpectedly, not for my sister as she became, but for the relationship I thought we had, for the trust I gave freely, for the innocence I lost. I let myself feel that grief without letting it define me, because here's the truth no one talks about enough. You can survive something horrific and still miss what never truly existed. Both things can be true at the same time. I don't know what the future holds. I don't pretend that everything is perfect now, but I wake up every day knowing one thing with certainty. I am not weak, I am not broken, and I am no longer anyone's victim. What happened to me could have ended my life. Instead, it changed how I choose to live it. And that choice, made again and again, even on the hard days, is something no one can ever take from me again.
Even now, years later, I sometimes catch myself scanning rooms, noticing exits, measuring distances, thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. Those instincts never fully disappear, but instead of fear controlling me, I let it remind me that I survived, and that survival gives clarity, not weakness. I also began reflecting on the people who had surrounded me, friends, colleagues, family. Some had been oblivious to what was happening. Some had dismissed small warning signs as paranoia. I realized that surviving a betrayal like this doesn't just teach you about the betrayer, it teaches you about human nature, about who pays attention and who turns away, about who stands by you when nothing makes sense, and who chooses convenience over loyalty. For months, I worked on reclaiming my personal space. My apartment became a sanctuary. I filled it with things that made me feel grounded: plants, sunlight, books, simple furniture, reminders that I could build a life that belonged only to me. Every decision was deliberate, every object placed with intention. I didn't want to leave anything to chance, but I also didn't want to live in fear. One day, a friend I had distanced myself from reached out. They wanted to reconnect. I listened carefully, testing their intentions, noting every detail. I realized that my ability to trust slowly returned when I gave myself permission to observe rather than blindly believe. Survival taught me discernment, and discernment became freedom. Then came the moments I never thought I would experience again. Laughter that wasn't forced, moments of peace, and finally, a quiet satisfaction in being alive. I didn't need anyone's validation for it. I didn't need praise or recognition. Simply knowing that I could wake up, make choices, and feel the sun on my skin without immediate panic, that was enough. I also started speaking about my experience in small, controlled ways, not on social media, not for attention, but in spaces where it could help others recognize warning signs. I spoke at support groups, to close friends, to strangers who had felt trapped in toxic relationships. I learned that telling your story isn't just about catharsis, it's about creating awareness, giving others the courage to act before things escalate. Through all of this, I learned a crucial truth. Betrayal doesn't just teach fear, it teaches vigilance, strength, and ultimately resilience. I now understand that trauma shapes you, but it doesn't define you. Every choice I make is a statement that I refuse to be controlled, silenced, or diminished, that I survived something calculated and cruel, and I continue to live fully. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Lena and Ethan in their isolation behind bars. Part of me doesn't care. Part of me hopes they confront the reality of their choices, but I don't dwell on it. My life isn't about retribution. It's about survival and reclaiming joy, peace, and trust in myself. At night, when the world is quiet, I sometimes think about the version of me that didn't survive, how close I came to losing everything I loved, everything I was. And then I remember the steps I took to protect myself, noticing patterns, documenting the truth, escaping, and ultimately choosing life over fear. That version of me is gone, but in its place is someone stronger, someone sharper, someone unshakable. I want anyone who hears my story to understand this. Danger doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles, it hugs, it whispers, it shares your memories. And survival isn't just about running away, it's about recognizing it, acting decisively, and refusing to be silenced. Healing isn't instant, it isn't complete, but it is possible, and it is powerful. Every day, I choose to live in ways that honor my strength, not my pain. I choose connections that are real and nurturing. I choose peace over revenge, awareness over ignorance, and life over fear. I survived my sister's obsession, my husband's betrayal, and the careful, deliberate plan to erase me. And I continue to survive, not because I am unbreakable, but because I refuse to let anyone else define the limits of my existence. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who endured the unthinkable, who refused to surrender, and who continues to claim her life on her own terms. That reflection is no longer haunted. It is resolute. It is free. It is mine. And that, above all, is the lesson I want others to take from my story. Survival isn't just staying alive. It's reclaiming your life in ways no one else can ever take away.
After years of slowly piecing my life back together, I began to understand that the aftermath of survival is not just physical safety, it's emotional reclamation. It's the quiet mornings when you wake up without fear pressing down on your chest. It's the ability to make a choice without someone else manipulating the outcome. It's realizing that you were not defined by the danger that almost ended you. I started to live intentionally. I chose friendships that were nurturing, connections that respected boundaries, and environments that felt safe. I learned to listen to myself again, to trust my instincts, my intuition, my feelings. Those instincts had saved me before, and I had learned not to ignore them. Every decision I made from that point forward was filtered through the lens of self-preservation and self-respect. There were still moments of struggle. Sometimes I would wake in the night with the same tightness in my chest I felt when Lena stood over the cliff. Sometimes I would question whether I could ever trust someone again, whether love could exist without manipulation. But each of those moments became opportunities for growth rather than setbacks. I learned to sit with discomfort, to confront fear without letting it control me, and to see the difference between danger and caution. I also made peace with my story. Sharing it selectively became a source of empowerment. Every time I spoke to someone who had experienced manipulation, betrayal, or abuse, I realized the truth. My story mattered because it could save someone else. If I could help even one person recognize the signs before it escalated, then the trauma I endured had purpose beyond survival. The legal aftermath of Lena and Ethan's actions slowly faded from headlines, but I never forgot the lessons. My life could have ended in the most ordinary, horrifying way, quiet, unnoticed, with no one suspecting the truth. But it didn't. I survived. And that survival was not passive, it was active. It required observation, courage, decisiveness, and the willingness to act in moments of fear. One evening, years later, I met someone who would eventually become my partner. I approached this relationship with vigilance, yes, but also with hope. I understood the difference between trust and blind faith. I understood that love should never come with fear. And most importantly, I knew I had to honor myself first. This time, I didn't compromise who I was, and I didn't allow history to repeat itself. I began speaking publicly about my experience, not to sensationalize, but to educate. The conversations that mattered were the ones that helped people recognize subtle manipulation, recognize signs that someone close to them might be toxic, and most importantly, recognize their own instincts before it was too late. I discovered that many people live under similar pressures and fears, but have no one to validate what they feel. My voice became a bridge to others, a reminder that survival can include awareness, empowerment, and community. The most powerful moment of all came quietly. One afternoon, I found myself walking through a park, sunlight streaming over the trees, people laughing around me. For the first time in years, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I realized I could walk freely, live openly, and exist fully in the world without constantly measuring my steps or calculating potential danger. It didn't erase the past. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it redefined me. I was no longer just a survivor of my sister's obsession and my husband's betrayal. I was a woman who reclaimed her life. Every day of safety, every day of choice, every day of freedom was a victory, no matter how quiet. I want anyone listening to know this. Danger can be close, often closer than you think. It can disguise itself in love, familiarity, and family. But the power to survive, to reclaim your life, to recognize your own worth lies within you. Intuition is real. Boundaries are necessary. Speaking up is not weakness, it is strength. And choosing life after someone tries to take it is the most radical act of all. I will never forget what happened. I will never forgive the attempt on my life, but I will also never allow it to define me. The memory of betrayal has become a teacher, guiding me to vigilance, awareness, and strength.
And every day I choose life. I choose freedom. I choose myself. Because survival is not just about being alive, it's about living fully, consciously, and unapologetically. And that choice, made every single day, is more powerful than any plan someone could have had to take my life, my happiness, or my freedom.
Even now, when I look back at everything that happened, it's hard to believe I survived. Not just the near-death moments, but the constant manipulation, the betrayal, the careful plotting by people I trusted most. Every memory reminds me of the fragility of life and the strength it takes to hold on to it when others try to take it away. I've learned that survival is not just escaping harm. It's reclaiming your time, your space, your peace. It's learning to recognize control disguised as love, manipulation disguised as care, and danger hidden behind familiar faces. It's learning to trust yourself again after someone you loved tried to destroy you. There are nights when the memory of that day by the cliff still creeps into my dreams. The sound of the rocks tumbling, the weight of fear pressing down on me, the look in my sister's eyes as she revealed her true intentions. Those moments are burned into me. But instead of paralyzing me, they remind me of what I'm capable of. They remind me that I made choices that saved my life, that I refused to let fear define me, that I refused to be erased. I want everyone listening to understand something important. Your instincts are real. Your fears are valid. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't wait for someone else to validate your feelings. Don't ignore warning signs. Protect yourself. Act. And if you survived something that could have ended you, don't just live, thrive. Claim your life fully. Don't let the darkness take away your light, your joy, or your freedom. Healing is a process. It's not linear. Some days I feel strong, like nothing can touch me. Other days the memories come back, sharp and overwhelming, and that's okay. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live in spite of what happened. It means turning survival into power. I want to leave you with a message that I wish I had heard when everything began. Life is precious, and your presence matters. Every day you continue, every choice you make to stand for yourself, every boundary you set is a victory. The people who try to hurt you do not get to define your story. You do. If my story reached you, if it made you pause, or if it reminded you to pay attention to the signs around you, I want you to take a moment and do something right now. Comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? I want to know how far this story travels, and I want to hear from you. Sharing your location and time is more than a comment. It's a reminder that no matter where you are, people are surviving, growing, and reclaiming their lives too. And if this story inspired you, scared you, or made you think twice about someone in your life, please don't just scroll past. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. My channel is a space where real stories are shared, where lessons are learned, and where we can grow stronger together. Every story has the power to change someone's perspective, and your presence here makes that possible. Remember, survival isn't just about being alive. It's about living fully, consciously, and unapologetically. It's about learning from what happened, protecting yourself, and choosing life every single day. And the most radical act of all is taking that choice and using it to inspire others. So, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it? I want to connect with each of you who are listening right now. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like mine. Stories that shock, stories that teach, and stories that remind us all to pay attention to the signs before it's too late. You survived by listening to yourself, by trusting your instincts, by refusing to let others define your limits. That's the part of the story that matters most. And sharing it with others, that's how we turn survival into strength. Because life is too precious to waste, and your story, your choices, your resilience, your courage deserves to be heard.